So tonight we'll be talking about short-term rentals in Calgary, and we'll have Natasha Flemming present for us. She's a real estate investor and she's killing it. She's doing really good. I'll hand it off to Natasha.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the great introduction. Yes, I am Natasha Flemming. I'm a full-time real estate investor for about 2 years. And I used to be a financial advisor, I used to be a mortgage broker, but I decided 2 years ago to go full-time into real estate investing, and it was the best decision I ever made. Is there any other full-time real estate investors in the room? Really? Okay, I thought there was going to be more. I totally thought there was going to be more. Okay, well, soon, one day.
Oh, you can sit.
I have over 20 doors right now with partners and myself. What I'm working on right now is I have a 20-unit development project in Calgary and a 40-unit new build in Leduc that I'm working on.
Sorry.
So that's just, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm super into multifamily. Anybody else into multifamily? Yay, perfect. Okay, I love the multifamily. But yeah, tonight we're going to really focus on short-term rentals and the fundamentals and some of the changes that are coming to Calgary. So here's all of the updates coming into effect in April. There's a lot of big things happening. So short-term rental definition is changing from 30 days to 180 days. So if you were thinking of doing medium-term rental, technically you need to get a license now and go through all of these steps. Next up is the fees changing. So these are the fees. So primary residence is different from a non-primary residence. And if you're getting a new license versus renewing your license, there's different fees. The other thing is there's a fee now for short-term rental companies of $3,000 a year. Yikes. Now this is kind of a good thing that's changing. So I think it was in June, they introduced it where you had to have a condo board consent with a seal if your unit was in a townhouse or condo that had a condo board, that you needed to provide your condo board's consent in your application. This was affecting a lot of people because there was a lot of blind eye to doing short-term rentals, but as soon as they had to sign off on something, they weren't providing it to people to get their license, and it was a big kerfuffle. So now they're actually going to be removing that in April if you were dealing with any issues with this. So it's going to be gone, which is actually a good thing. With the condo board thing, if your bylaws state you can't do short-term rental, you still cannot do it. You just don't have to provide the seal anymore, by the way. This is a big thing that's happening. Who knows, things could change too again. But there's going to be a moratorium on new non-primary residence licenses. So they're going to take a pause on them, not necessarily in April, but this is coming in April. What they're saying is that the vacancy rates, and it's based on the purpose-built rental market data from CMHC. So you're going to see different vacancy numbers for all of Calgary and for Canada. It's based purely on the purpose-built rental market data. Right now, it's at 4.8% vacancy. This report doesn't come out till about October, in the fall of every year annually. So at first I thought this was a really big thing that was going to happen in April, but it sounds like they're going to continue doing all of the short-term rental licenses because our vacancy is at 4.8, and it needs to come down to 2.5 for this to come into effect. So this could come into effect in the fall. Who knows? It depends where that number basically hits. So what you will still need to apply. So these came out last year, where they added a fire safety plan, proof of ownership or owner consent. So if you are a manager, you'll have to have the owner consent authorization form to submit. And you'll need proof of insurance that states that it covers your short-term rental. I have some recommendations in there for companies that I've used. I've used Square One. They're really good. I think they're pretty cheap. Zensurance is a brokerage. I have not used Aviva or Wawanesa, but definitely get some quotes. But it has to state that they basically allow short-term rentals. And you have to have a minimum $2 million liability. As well, they have to be registered insurer in Alberta. I think it's going to be less of an issue, but just make sure that the one that you go with is registered with Alberta. Everyone's going to need a fire inspection. on their short-term rentals. They say annual. I mean, who knows if they're actually going to go through that? I don't know. But as of right now, they're going to have to do a fire inspection. For a full list of all of the requirements, please go to the City of Calgary website before applying or before buying a property that you plan to short-term rental to make sure that you will qualify. Okay, so now that, let's see here, now that we know that what we need for short-term rental licensing, we'll get into the should you short-term rental or long-term rent your secondary suite. So here's the things that you're going to need to take into consideration, because it really depends. There's a lot of things that will come into consideration, and this is not even a full list, I would say, but this is the main things that will come into play when you're trying to decide whether to short-term rent or long-term rent. Number one is return on investment. I think that's the most important metric and formula you're going to need to know and understand inside and out how to use it, how to calculate it, what are the different numbers that come into play. Cash on cash. Does anybody know the difference between cash on cash and return on investment? Go for it.
Cash on cash specifically relates to how much money you had to put into the deal to make it happen. Whereas return on investment is an overarching term that plays over time. Cash on cash, like when you exit an investor, we'll talk about their cash on cash return. Pretty much.
So cash on cash is your cash flow divided by your amount that it took to get to all of the costs and your down payment. So it's a yearly metric to go off of, but it's your cash flow. Return on investment can be speculative because you need to know what your end profitability would be based on a sale price. So this can be difficult, but I still use it and I still will project what I think my return on investment will be. And then as well, I will check to see every year, I'm going to see, okay, if I were to sell it, what's my ROI? Because it's going to change. Cash flow does not determine the profitability of your property. So there's tax considerations. So your taxes will be treated differently on a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. There is also a 4% Alberta tourism tax levy for Airbnb and short-term rental income. There's headache considerations because obviously when it comes to short-term rentals, there's a little bit more work involved. Of course, you can hire property managers, but just thinking of the different workload from a long-term rental to short-term rentals. I mean, I've made it where there's actually really not a big difference in my short-term rental management to my long-term rentals because I have the right systems and I have the right people in place, but everyone's journey is a little bit different. Location. So there's places in the city where I would not do short-term rentals. They might yield high cash flow, but there's places I wouldn't really do. As well with quality. If you have a nice, beautiful interior design and renovation, but the outside of your property or building or landscaping or the houses around are really ugly, people when they go to the property are not going to feel maybe safe. They're going to feel it's still grungy, maybe lipstick on a pig kind of situation. So quality, including parking, a lot of these things come into consideration. I have a lot of properties where I strictly long-term rent because it would be a disaster if I tried to short-term rent them. I would not make more money because I've also run the numbers on, okay, if I were to short-term rent it, how much more income would I actually make because there's more expenses involved, which we'll get into. So we're going to go over some fundamentals before getting into some examples. Return on investment versus cash on cash. In order to calculate your return on investment and your cash on cash, you're going to need to know your profit. So you're going to need to know sale price, approximately, your yearly cash flow, debt pay down, purchase price, and all other costs involved. So your purchase costs, sale costs, like lawyer costs, realtor costs, and any renovations that you do, maintenance, stuff like that. So your formula is sale price plus your cash flow plus your debt pay down minus purchase price minus all other costs. Return on investment, profit divided by the total money in times 100. Then you're going to divide it by the total amount of years to get your annualized return on investment. So this is a mistake some people miss. They might think, oh, I'm 100% return on investment. But if it took 10 years to get 100% return on investment, it's only 10% per year. Calculating cash on cash, so yearly cash flow divided by total money in times 100. So I call this the Teeter-Totter Effect because the higher the down payment, typically the higher the cash flow you're going to get. But there's a myth. High cash flow equaling a good deal. This is not true at all. The truth is that your leverage dictates your return on investment, and a higher return on investment means it's a better deal. Return on investment is how you're going to decide which deal you should go forward with and which option you should do. Otherwise, if you're getting a 10% or a 5% return on investment, you're better off not dealing with all of the headaches that real estate comes with and the risks involved and just basically putting it into a GIC nowadays is like 4% or 3.5% now maybe. Okay, so we're gonna go into some examples. So you bought a house for $550,000 with a 20% down payment, and you put $50,000 of renovations into making it a separate suite, and your mortgage is $440,000 amortized over 30 years at a 5% interest rate. So let's say you rent the basement for $1,500 and you rent the main floor for $2,000. Your income is $42,000. Here's your expenses. You got PITI, mortgage, property tax, insurance, and maintenance. There's your yearly cash flow. What's missing on this? Anyone want to take a crack at it? Vacancy. Even residential. What's the other thing that's missing? I think someone else said it. Property management fees. Now, there are people where it's 100% rented all the time and they manage it themselves. It can happen. But there's two issues with not including in your calculations. Number one, not including a management fee, it's hard to scale if you don't think of having someone else manage it in the future. If you're stuck managing your own properties, it's really difficult to scale. The other thing is you need to know you have a margin of safety as well. Your cash on cash return will change dramatically if you start having vacancy, if you need to hire a property manager, it's highly affected. So if your cash on cash is 5%, you have no room for a margin of safety if you don't include these things. Now, who thinks $667 a month is really good cash flow? Put your hand up. 2 people. That's it, really. I think it's pretty good. Wait. Okay. Who thinks 5% cash on cash is a good deal? Okay, thank God. So, based on those numbers, so 8,000, this is not including property management, it's not including vacancy. Based on $667 a month in cash flow, on this deal, you had to put $160K in. It's 5% cash on cash. I would not do that deal, personally. Some people will, because there's other things that people take into consideration, like Vancouver, like they are not banking on cash flow. Here, we can make deals that have that cash flow and they hedge us against risk. So I'm never buying something that's below doing negative. So let's compare. How does it affect the deal if you're doing a higher down payment? So 20% versus a 30% down payment. In this scenario, I did include vacancy and property management, and everything is apples to apples. The only difference is the 30% down payments. So the mortgage payments are gonna be slightly different. So I ran the cash on cash return on this. It's a 1.59 based on this scenario and a 2.83 based on 30% down payment. So by doing more of a down payment, yes, you might have a slightly higher cash flow per month, but it doesn't actually make sense to put your money towards that.
So 1.59% a year is what you're making on your cash?
Yes. That's not return on investment, it's just based on your cash flow.
So from those numbers, wouldn't you be better off putting in a GIC where you're making 4% a year?
100, well, okay, actually go back because it depends on your return on investment actually, which we'll go into. Same situation, but how does a 20% down payment and a 30% down payment affect your return on investment? So the only difference is here is gonna be that you have a higher cash flow, so I included that. I included $1,000 in maintenance, no, they're all the same. So here's your cash flow here, $2,500 versus $6,000 on the other side. So pretty big difference in the actual cash flow. The return on investment difference actually went down the more money that they put into the deal. It went from 21% to 16% because you had to put more money into the deal to get to that cash flow. So that's why it's so important to run your hypothetical return on investment situation numbers before even buying your property to determine how much you should be putting down. If your goal is high cash flow, if you're in retirement and you're like, I want to cash flow, $5,000 a month, and you have a bunch of different properties, yeah, and like if that's going to, help your lifestyle, maybe that's it. Everyone's goals are going to be a little bit different, but you have to know what your goal is and have to understand return on investment and cash on cash. All right, so long-term rentals versus short-term rentals, cash on cash return. So these are the things that you have to include for long-term rentals. And these, I missed maintenance. Both of these are missing maintenance. So add that in there. But short-term rental, you're going to have to add a few more expenses in there. And as you can see, the property management fees will increase as well. So for long-term rentals, I'm seeing between 8 to 12%. For short-term rentals, you can be between 20 and 30%. Some are 25%, some are as high as 30%. You have to be able to run your numbers at, where does it actually make sense? Plus, don't forget that tourism tax levy. Let's see here. So part of your cash flow as well, your additional costs, other than your down payment, your renovations, is your furnishing. So then those are the things you're gonna have to include to run your cash on cash. So an example, if you were to long-term rent the top and the bottom, spelled bottom wrong. If you were to rent the top and the bottom versus renting the basement suite and short-term rental the top. I say the top because a main floor is gonna be more desirable than a basement suite, so you're probably gonna have a higher cash on cash. Of course, you can do it any way you want. You can always run your numbers in different scenarios. In this long-term rent scenario, we're at about a 2.15% cash on cash. I went probably conservative. Of course, the income for your short-term rent is how you calculate it is an average per night rent times 365 days a year, and then you times it by your occupancy rate. If you're 75% occupancy, which I did this example on, maybe you're 60%, maybe you're 80%. These numbers will change based on these different variables in here. So in this situation, I said 75%. I said a 20% property management fee. We included the tourism levy, and then we added the basement suite rent. Now you're gonna have added expenses as well. So utilities, I said 60% of 400 because maybe you split it with the basement suite or something. Internet subscription services like Netflix or noise monitor system subscriptions, video monitoring subscriptions, so many different things that you can add in there. And to each, it's not just Calgary, it's Alberta. So 4% tourism tax levy it's 4% on the income that you receive. Doesn't matter where, but it's 4%. And it includes cleaning fees. It includes, so obviously your nightly rent and cleaning fees. Some do include other fees in that. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to submit this, include everything. It's all 4% of all of your income, not minusing expenses.
But you can pass it to your clients, right? I mean, to your...
You can on Airbnb. On certain platforms, yes, you can add it in there where your client does pay for it. And it will look like a total payment. But at the end of the night, when you're on the Airbnb platform, if you include it and other people are not including it, your nightly price will look way higher than others, and then they might just avoid yours altogether. So you have to be cognizant of that total price.
As per, I think, some recent announcement, has Airbnb started collecting and remitting it to the government directly? Because I think I read somewhere that Airbnb has to collect it directly from the guest and remit to the government directly without any involvement from the property owners.
So, no. If you chat GPT this, it will say yes. If you Google this, it will probably say yes, but I looked at my own numbers and it does not include it. Okay. So there might be things happening behind the scenes. Things might be changing, absolutely, but as of this moment, I'm not seeing it included, and I'm not seeing it actually be remitted. So again, be careful what ChatGPT tells you because it's not always right.
So a question. Does the 4% only apply to Airbnb listings, or with the new rule of 6 months, does it apply to the regular rent that you would rent?
So the 180-day rule is with the license requirements for Calgary. I would have to double check that. I don't know. I think it's 30 days. It might be even 90 days. So that's a really good question. I would double check this information on the tourism levy on what do they include as short-term rentals. They may not even have a consecutive day or a night. It might just be, it might be this. If you're getting income from Airbnb it has to be included. So that is a really good question. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure.
Second thing is, would it be
Okay, most people don't. They don't even know about it. I don't know what happens, but now Airbnb is starting to get a lot more information from the Airbnb hosts. Like now you have to basically give your SIN number and everything. So I believe that they're actually starting to remit it to the government. So they probably will see this to see who's not paying the Alberta tourism levy. This is speculation though. I don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes. There's definitely a lot of people.
It's like not paying your taxes.
Well, there are penalties, and the very large penalties. I did this where I didn't know about it for the longest time, and then I started getting into it, and then I had like thousands of dollars in penalties, and then they said that you can appeal it, and I just sent in an email, said, hey, I didn't even know about it, can you remove all these penalties? And they just said, yeah, sure. It depends who you speak to, it depends how high your penalties are. It's probably not gonna work more than once either, but there is an appeal process. Any other questions about this slide okay, good. So the other thing I actually want to mention here too is another metric that I use is if I furnish a short-term rental and it costs $15,000 to furnish it, how long will it take for that money to be returned to me? Because if it's 1 or 2 years, it's lower risk than if it were to take 5 years. I'm like, ooh, I don't know if it's actually worth it. So that's just another metric that I have used.
I have a question.
Yep.
You're paying management fees 20%. Does that not include them having it cleaned?
No, that is not included. Good question. All right, so we got our example. Okay, so some things I wish I knew before starting an Airbnb. So expect slow winter months. You might even be negative cash flowing for those winter months, but you have to look at the entire year of income and project for the entire year, because your August or July is gonna look very different than your winter months. I've made 14K in just July, and I've made 2K in a December. Huge difference, right? So you have to look at the whole year, and don't be afraid when you are really slow. I'm on Facebook pages, and there's like these Airbnb hosts that are like, oh my gosh, what's happening with Airbnb? Like I'm not getting any bookings every single winter. And I'm like, hey, you guys know this is gonna happen. Number 2, you're a unique factor. So if you really wanna succeed on Airbnb, you need to be unique. And I'm sorry, but bold colors is not going to make you stand out. And one accent wall is not gonna make you stand out. Now, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be unsuccessful. You just want to have the highest leverage to be the most successful and outdo all of your competition and make the most money. So the more unique your property is, the more niche it is, you can get a higher return on investment and cash on cash. So for example, I have a property that has this gigantic round window.
I was just thinking that in my head. I was gonna say, how about a big window?
I've been like top 10, top 5% like for a couple of years now. And that's my hero my hero photo. It's the first photo that someone sees because it's gonna look very different than everything else. If you picture of your kitchen or your living room, 20 other ones will have a picture of their kitchen in their living room. It doesn't differentiate you. Run your numbers again, including a management fee, because the last thing you want is to be stuck with having to manage it yourself when you become a tired landlord or a tired short-term rental host. It will happen. At first, it's very exciting. You burn out sometimes. It definitely happens. And you don't want to be stuck with having to do this, or you're gonna be negative cash flowing if you have to hire a property manager. Run your numbers with it. Regulation risk and licensing requirements. So as we've seen constant license requirement changes, as we saw in BC, they made some pretty big drastic changes, and a lot of people thought that it was completely banned across all of BC, which is actually not true. But as soon as these regulations come out, there's a lot of misinformation and misinterpretation that happens with this. So make sure you're getting your information from a direct source and a credible source, not social media. Love thy neighbor. So your neighbor can get you shut down if they complain too much about you. I don't know if that's necessarily for Calgary, but I've had, a place on a lake where the neighbors just didn't like us for some reason, and now they're implementing in the bylaws in the whole municipality that they're banning all of it because of our one Airbnb. So make sure you talk to your neighbors, communicate with them, give them your number, and say, if anything happens, please call me or call the police, obviously, if there's something really bad happening. But feel free to call me anytime if you have any complaints. I want to know first, and I want to fix it. I want to make it right. This will help you tremendously. Okay, removing unnecessary items. I learned this the hard way. So these stupid shower caddies and these bottle trays and unnecessary decor everywhere. So I say shower caddies because my cleaners kept missing shower caddies because I didn't really think about it. And there'd be soap scum dripping from them. And it immediately makes your bathroom feel gross and disgusting, right? So I removed them. I had these like cute little trays that had all my bottles on them. Again, it was something that got easily missed, where there was toothpaste on it or something, and it's just gross. Remove as many of these little things as possible, and it'll save you a lot of headache. And your cleaners a lot of headache, and you want to make your cleaners' lives easier. Think commercial. When you have a short-term rental, you have a lot of people going in and out and in and out, in and out, and using everything in the house. You can either get, pay a higher price for commercial grade things, such as furniture or even your renovations like flooring and stuff. Or if you don't, just budget for a higher wear and tear. There's your bed frames. If you get those wood slats, they're gonna break. If you get a metal one, it's not gonna break. Stuff like that. Think commercial. Any questions?
On the point number 3 for running the numbers, in a business like Airbnb, what kind of, do you look at the short-term numbers or the long-term numbers? What would you recommend in terms of goals and strategies to come?
Run both numbers. The numbers will tell you what to do, because everyone will have a preference too. If they say 2% versus a 6%, they're like, it's not worth doing. Everyone's preference will be a little bit different. If your difference is 2% and 12%, it's like, it's probably worth it to do short-term rental. Good question. Oops. Also, I wanted to include, so my mantra for regulation risk is, it used to be that if for some reason yours gets shut down, you can't do it anymore, I can just turn it into a medium-term rental or a long-term rental and I'll be safe. As long as my numbers work then, I'll be safe. What happens when 5,000 short-term rentals enters the market as medium-term or long-term? What happens with the supply and demand dynamic? There's so many variables, and you don't want to do too many what if and worst case scenarios and stuff like that. It's good to think ahead. Don't let it scare you, but you got to mitigate your risk as much as you possibly can. All right, 5 ways to avoid bad guests, cranky guests. I no longer offer one-night stays because I have the choice in doing that. If you need to, you still can. You just have to be cautious. Maybe implement a few things to help mitigate that risk. It's helped me a lot. I actually don't think I've ever had a bad guest. 1 or 2 maybe, but wasn't even that bad. So I have mine at 2 minimum. You can change it to whatever you're comfortable with. Review your guests. So especially people that have no reviews, this is strictly Airbnb. If they have no reviews, you're gonna start to ask them some more questions. Purpose of your stay, how many guests will they bring? You're gonna wanna get to know them a little bit better. I've had some people, these ladies said that they were booking a night because they all just wanted to get together and have some pizza and have a business meeting. And I was like, okay, just so you know, there's cameras on the outside and noise monitors. And she said, oh, well, we're gonna be ordering a lot of different food from different places, so you're probably gonna see on the cameras a lot of different people. I'm like, okay, fishy, no, not doing it. So yeah, just get to know them a little bit better, ask them some questions. If they do have a lot of reviews, they're pretty good. I still try to get to know them and ask them questions. Because I also like to personalize it sometimes too. If there's a birthday or something, or I have a lot of bachelorettes actually that they want to do, not bachelorette parties, that's not allowed. They do like wedding shot photos and stuff of getting ready. And you just want to be cognizant of that. Give them a really good experience. Setting the right expectations. So be really upfront if you think someone might complain about something. If you're like, oh no, they won't notice this little thing or whatever, it's gonna show up in the reviews, and you cannot remove reviews. It's really, really hard. Sometimes you can, it's just really, really hard. But for example, one of mine has a basement suite, and I put it in 3 different places on this Airbnb ad because they're not gonna read every single thing that you have in there, and it's gonna get missed. If it's really important, I wanna make sure that they're gonna know this. I'm gonna put it in the welcome message, I'm gonna put it in the house rules, I'm gonna put it in the description. There's a basement suite, you cannot complain about it. If you have noise from traffic, if you're downtown, there's gonna be noise from traffic and ambulance noises. It's pretty common sense, but put it in the listing, because then they can't complain about it. And if they do complain about it and it's in your listing, That's when you can get Airbnb to remove your complaint if you talk about it. So don't be afraid to put those things on. It's, it might scare off some people, but just be upfront about it. And stay in the Airbnb for a few nights. Be like, okay, I tried out these sheets and they're like staticky and really awful. I'm just gonna go get some new sheets. So stay in it. You'll be able to notice all these little weird things when you're actually in it. Instant booking, on or off. I've heard the algorithm loves instant book. They don't want it to be off. And I've tested this a few times, and so far it seems like you really need to have instant book on. What that means is that basically if you don't have it on, every single guest has to request to book, and then you have to approve it manually. If you have instant book on, you can click off certain things so that they can't instant book if they don't have any reviews. That person's still gonna have to request. So it's not necessarily risky in that sense. I think there's also a feature on there where you can decline it afterwards too if you're not comfortable with them. I think you have a short window to do that. I have outdoor cameras and I have inside noise monitors. Not on all of my Airbnbs, it depends on my location and the type of guests that I attract. This has been very, very helpful. My noise monitors, they notify me immediately if there's too much noise. So I'm alerted and red flagged if I think there's too many people and unauthorized guests in there, if they're disturbing my other, the other neighbors and stuff. I don't want to get shut down, and I'm gonna say, you guys gotta lower your music, your TV, or whatever it is. I haven't really had any too many things happen, but it does really protect you. Any questions?
Natasha, for the cameras and noise monitors, do you just put it there and don't even tell them?
You have to tell. Oh, you cannot have cameras inside.
No, outside, but for the noise monitors inside, you need to
I put it in there, yeah. I put it in there. I say, yes, there's noise monitors.
Oh, that's fine. But it don't say there is a noise in that corner in the living room.
Will it alert the guest?
Yeah, for the guests, if you say there is a noisy monitor, right? You're gonna have to have some speakers or something somewhere, but you don't.
It depends on the noise monitor you get. But yes, I have the ones where it will say, I think it does say it just says something like, please, you're exceeding the noise level, please, calm down. So that I'm not alerted every single time. It's you have 5 minutes to lower. Otherwise I'm gonna get notified.
Yeah, mostly say because someone could just go there and cut the wire.
No, there is, no, so the noise, they thought of everything.
Yeah.
If it's unplugged, if anything tampers with it, it will notify you immediately. If it turns off, you're notified immediately. So they can't do that. Mine also has a smoke detector on it too. So if someone's vaping, it'll actually detect that. There's also a few other features that have been really cool. I forget them, but I recommend them. I use Minute for the noise monitor. I know there's other companies. I like Minute though. Cool. Okay, so that was my presentation for tonight. If you want to connect with me, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. If you want a free gift, I've got a short-term rental analysis spreadsheet. It's not an actual tool online. It's just a spreadsheet. I like it because I get to see all of my different variables. So if you want access to that, scan the QR code. Yeah, any other questions? We got some, I think we got a little bit more time. Yeah. Good stuff, okay. Andy.
I did short-term rental, but just a room. Do you recommend renting out just one room or a full suite?
I've never done by the room, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. I have a few people in the room that you should talk to though. Taylor and Peyton and Braden, I see you hiding back there. These people would know. They're actually a lot more than I do, actually. They manage short-term rentals, a lot of them.
Rules were a lot more relaxed a few years ago when I did that. So would some of these same rules apply, like the levy and that, because you're just...
Yep, levy. Do you guys know if the short-term rental license is allowed for room rentals in Calgary?
Individual rooms are allowed, multiple rooms at the same time.
One room in one house. Okay, that's the rule.
There's actually, I think it's called lodging home regulation on the City of Calgary website. It's a little bit weird because there's kind of a gap. I believe they have regulations from 1 to 4 room and then from 7 and up. And for some reason, there's nothing from 5 to 6. It's kind of a weird gap. But yeah, if you look lodging home on the City of Calgary website.
Yeah, check out the website. It'll tell you everything. All right, awesome. Everyone's got that QR code because it's going weaving.
I have a question for you. Would you do a long-term and short-term rental mix? Because we get asked that sometimes. So if you've got, let's say, basement suite, would you do one unit short term, one
Just
unit
wanna
long term?
hear
I
exactly.
have my answer, but I'm curious what you have to say about that.
It depends on all of these. It depends on all of these things. Where does it go? Depends on all of these things. Because it might make a lot of sense in one location and no sense in another location. Right? So my one I have a cash flow like on good years like $3,000, like bad years $2,000 a month because I rent the bottom and I short-term rental the top. Mind you, I bought it 5 years ago, so I just renewed my mortgage though, and it's still doing really well. But
That's another one for you. Where do you get your comparables for short-term rental?
oh, how do I like the numbers?
Yeah.
I've used Wheelhouse, I've used AirDNA, I've used the Airbnb website to get some numbers. They will all tell you different numbers. Talk to someone who's an expert, I think is the best way to get accurate numbers than a website, because I still keep going on, and there's like Price Labs too, I still keep going on them and I'm like, the numbers are way off from what I'm actually getting. So I personally can't trust them anymore. I trust my own personal judgment from experience now. And I would trust a short-term rental manager they deal with it every single day. They know how to run those numbers inside and out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to. My question was the same line because once I talked to a property management company and they gave you like a estimated rent if they Airbnb and stuff like that. So I was going to ask you how accurate and like if you do still your own analysis and like market analysis, or like there are other companies that do the market analysis for you and then you still compare with the numbers they are giving you. Or because I just thought that it was like the spread was not that great compared to like just rented basement, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, even get multiple opinions. I think getting multiple opinions is good for any situation. And of course, experience, even with experience, sometimes you're so experienced that you can be actually kind of off. So I still get second and third opinions on my stuff, because if you're like out of the game for a little bit, like you have like years old knowledge, when nowadays everything's changing so fast. But yeah, short-term rental property managers, they'll probably do it for free or maybe a consultation. I've seen people do like, if you don't need short-term rental management, but you just need a little bit of help with maybe the setup or running some numbers, maybe they might just do like a consultation or something. Some will do it for free. Yeah. The more really experienced people may charge a fee.
I have a question. So running Airbnb, you have a pretty attractive tax rate when it comes to tax time with active business. But there was a case last year where when an Airbnb owner sold their property, CRA deemed that they had to pay HST because it was an active business being sold.
GST.
GST, yeah.
In this case.
Right.
How do you kind of manage that risk? Because if it's a residential property, especially, you're going to sell it to a residential home buyer typically, right? And they're not a GST registrant, so how do...
I'm not an accountant. No financial advice, no tax advice. Do you know if they were selling the business with like a business of the Airbnb on top of the sale price?
No, so it was a residential property. It was used as an Airbnb, but then now
When they sell, they had that GST because it was sold as a business?
But CRA said because the use was Airbnb primarily. So, I mean, how do you manage that risk? I know you're not an accountant.
Talk to an accountant.
Okay.
I would say talk to an accountant.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's ways around it. I've never heard of that actually.
Okay.
Because if the person next buying it is, I guess if you're selling it, you're paying GST on the sale price is selling it. I've never actually heard of that. But I have not sold an Airbnb before actually. So I don't know. But really good question.
Just know it's a possibility.
Yeah,
If somebody bought the 1.9
I've seen this case,
mortgage,
actually.
like, it
Sorry?
doesn't-
I don't know, yeah.
It can, on paper, it can apply, but I
Yeah.
don't know how often it actually is
But
applied.
Ontario has specifically applied some new rules to do that, but not in Alberta. I haven't heard anything in Alberta.
Yeah.
But I think in Ontario there is something like this.
Depends where.
Double-checking before
Yeah.
invest short-term rental properties. My question was, so as you mentioned that STR companies have to pay $3,000 a year. So that's for platforms, right? Airbnb or for
It's a separate category of a license requirement on, so there's like a license for the Airbnb, but there's like a separate license requirement for short-term rental managers.
So for example, if you are running multiple Airbnb properties in the city, so will it be considered as a company and you will have to pay that? Who will be paying?
If it's like all of your own short-term rentals, or are you, like you have a company that manages other people's rentals?
could be any case. So if you're running a company, like for example, if I'm doing it not as a registered company, but I'm putting
Personally?
it on my personal income, then that is not applicable.
To my understanding, I don't believe it's applicable if it's your own properties. It may be when you're applying for your owner. You know, again, these guys are going to probably know more about that than me.
Typically, property management's considered when you do it for someone else.
Okay, so
Yep. Generally speaking, so.
Yeah. You mentioned taxes. What I do love about short-term rentals is that you can write off so much more stuff than on a long-term rental, because anytime you're fixing anything in there or buying a new bed frame or buying a new mattress, everything that you buy for that Airbnb can be written off. I probably write off more than I should. Again, not financial advice, but
We'll cut that
personally,
part off.
Yeah.
When you're furnishing your Airbnb for the first time.
don't put that in the YouTube video, brother.
Saying is replacing you can write off, or you can write off the furnishing as well. When you first start your Airbnb and you furnish it, can you write that off in the first year, or it's just replacement that you?
I'm not an accountant. I've done it. Your accountant might say something different, but I have done it.
The first buying counts as a spending into the business.
Yeah.
Buying for the property, so it's a business.
Technically, capital expenditure on the property of renovations that isn't maintenance.
It's a capital improvement.
It's a capital improvement.
So you could write off 4% of that per year and amortize that, and they're different amounts per different thing. But if it's under a certain amount, if you buy a laptop for your computer, even if it's going to last for 3 years, you can just write it all off in the first year. So but if you completely renovate your entire house and do a $100,000 renovation, that's not an expense that you could write off against your personal income, which I see people try and do. It's like that's not how that works. You're going to get a call for that.
Yeah.
Capital improvement, and you can write off 4% of that a year, like you can already write off 4% in your taxes. But again, talk to an accountant to get the exact numbers on how to do that.
Yeah.
Most of the expenses are just legit expenses, because you typically buy those if you weren't running an Airbnb.
Yeah.
You wouldn't buy a bed. You wouldn't buy that furniture. So
Yeah,
it is
exactly.
a real legit expense.
Yeah. Yeah, so accountants are very important. So as you can tell, I'm a super nerd when it comes to all of this stuff, short-term rentals and running numbers and spreadsheets. I love them. So if there's one thing you take away from tonight, get a nerd on your team. There's people, these guys are all nerds. I know you guys are. You'll love your numbers. You'll run spreadsheets on the weekends for fun. So will I. Have a nerd on your team. Talk to these people. Talk to the experts. If you struggle, especially if you struggle with running numbers. We love our spreadsheets. We love running numbers. So yeah, if you haven't actually reached out to any of these guys yet, I definitely highly recommend it. If you're not, you're missing out. These guys know their stuff. Anyways, yeah, that's probably enough for questions tonight. So I guess it's free for all networking.